Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Dukdel TV. Once again, this is Dukdel, your practical guide in writing action research in education. This afternoon, you will be taught how to craft an action research title so that when you are going to write an action research, you will be guided. But before that, for those who are new to this channel, I want you to subscribe and then hit the notification bell so that if I have new videos relating to writing and action research in education, as well as growing and cultivating orchids, you will be updated. Before we are going to proceed to our topic this afternoon, let us try to recapitulate first of what has been discussed last meeting. Last meeting we discussed, or we started the discussion on the different methods of research. We discussed historical method as well as the descriptive method of research, wherein we enumerated and provided you an example of what are the 10 types of descriptive research. Before we are going to start our discussion this afternoon, make sure that you have a pen and a paper so that you could be able to jot down everything which you think these are necessary when you start writing an action research. So, what is an intervention or experimental research? Okay, so I want you to take note of the two important terms: intervention or experimental. This type of research evaluates the effect or outcome of a particular intervention or treatment. Okay, so take note again of the word intervention or treatment. Okay, so for example, inside your classroom, or if you are a mathematics teacher and you found out that the MPS or the mean percentage score of the student or students of this particular topic is very low. Okay, so you should have to think on how to increase the MPS of your students in this particular topic, or it could be competency. Okay, so after identifying, after knowing that the students are very poor when we talk about this particular competency, being a teacher, what should you do? Okay, so here you have to think of an intervention. It could be a technique, it could be an approach, it could be a strategy that you are going to expose these students for them to be able to increase their MPS or their mastery level. Okay, so let's continue. So it studies the cause and effect, relationship between certain factors on a certain phenomenon under controlled conditions. Okay. So, let's go back now to the identified problem. Okay. So, this time, you are thinking on what intervention could you apply so that the mastery level of your students in this particular topic in mathematics will increase. So, you are trying to solve somehow. You are trying to solve the problem, and this time, you are going to think on what to do. Okay. So, the subjects of the study are randomly assigned to the experimental group and to the control group, and both groups are exposed to similar conditions except for the intervention or treatment. Okay. So for example, you are designing a strategic intervention material. Okay. So as a teacher, as a mathematics teacher, you are thinking that this SIM might be addressed the identified problem of the students. What is our problem here? They are very poor, no? Their mastery level is very poor on this particular competency. So to address this, you are now designing a strategic intervention materials. But of course, in order to measure the efficacy of the SIM, you should have an experimental group and control group. Okay. So according to here, that both groups are exposed to similar conditions except for the intervention or treatment. Meaning to say, in your control group, you will be using the traditional method. Okay, so lecture, because that is what we call a traditional one. And then, your experimental group, they will be exposed with your SIM. Okay, so this is what we call experimental. However, there are cases that you are going to expose directly the students to your experiment, and then after that, you will be getting their scores in the conducted post-test. Okay. In this case, if you have only few students. Okay. So, in an experimental research, 20 subjects are accepted. Okay. So, since this is experimental, the students who are involved in this kind of research is known to be subjects. For example, one can assess or compare the effect or outcome of 2 or more methods of teaching math on the mathematical ability of the students. So, again, one can assess or compare the effect or outcome of 2 or more methods of teaching in order to measure the mathematical ability of the students. 2 or more health management practices. The recovery of patients, or 2 or more management styles on employees' productivity. Okay. So again, it could be 2 or more. No? It could be 2 or more. So for example, the efficacy of strategic intervention materials on the mathematics performance of the grade 9 students of Tungao National High School. Okay. So what is now the cause there? The cause is the low mastery level of the students in mathematics, specifically on this particular competency. Okay. So, in order to address this, you are going to expose the students into this SIM. After exposing the students into this SIM, you are going to test the students and try to see if there is a significant difference. Of course, in getting the significant difference, wherein we are going to use t-test. No? T-test is to be used in getting the significant difference, especially if your subjects are below 100. Okay, below 100. Now, you are going to conduct a pretest. Okay, so both groups, yung dalawang grupo, they will be subjected to pretest. After that, one group, this is what we call control group, will be exposed to traditional method, and this experimental group will be exposed to SIM. After 6 weeks, because the minimum number of weeks for us to be able to measure the efficacy of an intervention is 6 weeks. Okay. So after 6 weeks of exposing the students into this SIM, both groups will be subjected to post-test. Then after that, try to compare the result of the pretest and the results of the post-test, both groups, and try to see if the SIM is effective. So, there are 3 types of experimental design. No? The first one is post-test only experimental design. Second, we have the pre-test and post-test experimental design. And the last one is Solomon 4 group design. So these are the 3 types of experimental research design. First is we are going to discuss the post-test only experimental design. Okay, so what this design is all about? This design is known as a simple design. It is called post-test only since the data is collected after experimental treatment is complete. For example, hypothesis is that the color of a school nurse's uniform affects the degree to which the children display positive and negative affective behavior. So, affective behavior, positive or negative. So when it is positive, the school children, they will smile. If it is negative, the school children, they will cry. The causative or independent variable is the uniform color. Okay. So, the causative meaning to say, the cause of this is the color of the uniform of nurses. And the effect variable or dependent variable is the child's behavior. No? How they react to this uniform color. Okay. So the independent variable is manipulated by assigning some school nurses white uniforms and some with colored or printed uniforms. Thus, in the study, we could compare the affective behaviors of school children cared for by nurses with white uniforms and those cared nurses in colored or printed uniform. So it is now very clear. Very clear. Why? The cause is the uniform color and the effect is the behavior of the child. Next is the pretest posttest experimental design. Okay, so what this design is all about? Here, accordingly, it is more complex. It is called pretest posttest since there are 2 points of measurements. One before the experimental treatment and one after the experimental treatment. Okay, so before and after. Suppose we wanted to examine the effects of an SIM, no? The strategic intervention materials that I mentioned when we start this discussion. Okay. The design would involve exposing the students into this what we call SIM on the experimental group and no SIM on the control group at certain points in time. So one will be exposed to SIM. One will not be exposed. So you have 2 groups. One is experimental, the other one is control group. Okay. This allows us to examine if there are changes in the academic performance. So when we say academic performance, that is moved directly to the grade point average of the student. But when we say mathematics performance, it is only for mathematics. Okay. Because academic performance is the totality of the student's performance. So this time, we will try to examine if there are changes in the mathematics performance of the students as a result of exposing them into SIM. Okay, so what will happen? Pretest, both groups, experimental and control. Then control groups will not be exposed to experimental. Experimental will be exposed to SIM. After 6 weeks, they will be subjected to posttest, and let us try to determine if there are changes or significant changes, no, on the performance or mathematics performance of the students. For example, the efficacy of strategic intervention materials in the mathematics performance of the grade 10 students of Tungao National High School. So, I keep on talking, I keep on mentioning Tungao because I am from Tungao National High School. So, from the second example, it is clear that pretest will be done first, exposing them to experiment, exposing them to the intervention, the experimental group, and then after that, posttest. After the posttest, we will try to see if there is a significant difference. No? Significant difference from the pretest scores and posttest scores. So that's why when you are going to formulate a statement of the problem from this, what are the pretest and posttest scores of the grade 10 students in mathematics? Okay. So don't worry because our next topic will be on formulating action research questions. The last type of experimental research design is the Solomon 4-group design. So what is this design all about? Okay, so it is a version of Pretest Posttest design. It adds to additional groups. The purpose of adding the two groups is to separate the effects of the pretest and to segregate it from the intervention. In other words, a pretest may be synthesizing treatment that may affect the results of an actual treatment. It is an experimental group without the pretest, and it is the control group without the pretest. For you to be able to be enlightened in this kind of design, I want you to focus on the diagram presented. Okay. So in the diagram, you could be able to see that there are two experimental groups. Experimental group 1 and experimental group 2. And another two groups that are known to be the control groups. Okay, we have the control group 1 and control group 2. Okay, initially the investigator randomly assigned subjects to the 4 groups. Okay, so I want you to see the left side. No? On the left side, this box here shows that the researcher or investigator randomly assigned subjects to the 4 groups, the 2 experimental groups and 2 control groups. On the diagram presented, you could be able to see that out of the 4 groups, only experimental group 1 and control group 1 receives the pretest, followed by the treatment to the experimental group 1 and experimental group 2. Finally, all the 4 groups receive post-test, where the effects of the dependent variables of the study are observed and comparison is made of the 4 groups to assess the effect of independent variable on the dependent variable. Moreover, in this, experimental group 2 was observed at one occasion, and that score should be similar to average scores of those in experimental and control groups. To estimate the amount of change in experimental and control group 2, the average test scores of experimental and control groups 1 are used as baseline. The Solomon 4-group design is believed to be the most prestigious experimental research design since it minimizes the threat to internal and external validity. In addition, for example, if the intervention is a workshop to improve teachers' attitudes towards dropouts, the pretest may sensitize the teachers and affect their attitudes that point and obscure the analysis of the workshop effect. So that is a scenario on how are we going to apply or how are we going to utilize Solomon 4-group design. So before we end, I would like to give you some of the action research title that you could be able to use, or this will be your guide in constructing your action research title. Okay, first, the effect of verbal suggestion on overt pain reaction of selected post-operative patients. Again, the effect of verbal suggestion on overt pain reaction of selected post-operative patients. Okay. Next, the effect of cooperative learning approach on the performance in mathematics of junior high school students of Central Philippine University. Next, advertising, its effect on sales and profit of auto parts business establishments in Butuan City. Okay, next, the effect of in-house training on human relations on the productivity and efficiency of officer or office employees in private banks in Butuan City. Okay, second to the last, the effect of different levels of applied nitrogen on the growth of yield of rice. No? Again, the effect of different levels of applied nitrogen on the growth and yield of rice. And last one, the impact of the EDB assisted microfinance project on the living condition of the beneficiaries. So those are examples of an experimental or intervention research. So I hope that with this discussion you are now guided. No? You are now guided because last meeting I discussed historical research, descriptive research, following the 10 types of descriptive research, and today I discuss experimental or intervention research. So I hope that this time you know now how to discriminate the 3 designs of research. As we all know that research is necessary, especially in education, since there are lots of challenges that we are meeting every day. So it is a dire necessity for us to respond to these challenges so that somehow we are making a difference in our station. We are making a difference in our school. So I hope that you are now enlightened. I hope that you are now enlightened and you have now, a packet of desire in writing action research. Okay. So up next will be action research problems. So that will be our focus next week or next meeting. How to formulate action research problems. So that, again, after identifying a problem, you have now your action research problem and you could now start gathering literature to your topic. Okay, because as a researcher, it is our first concern is what is really the problem? Because what's the use of writing research without a problem? So that is our first concern. Identifying a problem and then after that, formulating action research problems. Okay, so that will be our topic next week. That will be our topic next week. Okay. So, thank you so much for watching. God bless. Bye-bye and stay safe always.